Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Sabo. I am here with the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, thanks to a close partnership with your DOJ COPS office. We're here today to talk about some evidence-based and science-backed practices for enhancing police recruiting and hiring. Before we get into that, just a little bit of background on the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology and a brief introduction of our presenters. For those attending, this session will be recorded today, so it is viewable in the future. In addition, we will have a Q&A box open so that we can moderate your questions and answer those at the end of the presentation, and the chat feature is enabled. Please be advised that everything that is in chat, everyone will see. All right, so what is SIOP, and also why are we here? First off, as I mentioned, my name is Kristen Sabo. I am an industrial organizational psychologist. My background actually involves also having served in the military and doing military psychology. And focused on performance enhancement, enablement strategy, and integration of research into policy. In addition, I lead for SIOP, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, our government relations and advocacy group, and work closely with another of our initiatives on policing, which is the group that is here today to discuss some science-backed practices with you. So SIOP is the premier professional association for science and practice of industrial organizational psychology. Effectively, we study and advise on people in work situations and work environments. We have more than 10,000 members worldwide. Members, by and large, have masters, if not PhDs. And members include folks from academia, government, and industry. It's really a cross-sector group. We're highly applied in terms of the science that we do. And that brings with it unique skill sets and perspectives as we bridge the gap between academic thought and also practice. You can see here a few of the more specific topics that industrial organizational psychologists have expertise in and also lead, both in practice and then also from a research perspective. So it's the science of the workplace at the individual and organizational levels. So this means everything from how people behave at work as individual people, how they interact in teams and groups, and all the way through the larger organization in terms of how it operates. We can apply research that improves well-being and performance of people and allows others to optimize that workplace. So this includes topics such as workforce planning, employee selection, leader development, job attitudes and motivation, work teams and how we implement them and improve them, enhancing DEI efforts, and also facilitating organizational change initiatives, amongst others. You can imagine it's a broad scope that we can influence because it turns out people at work act similarly in other environments, and work is not just paid. We work in a lot of different environments, and so the behaviors as we work together in groups in larger organizations supersede several environments. So today, as I mentioned, we're here due to the SIOP Policing Initiative, which is a specific task force that we've had in place for the past several years that includes experts that work in the space of policing as organizational psychologists. There has been just tremendous interest in this area and also research to bring bare best practices, and that's what we're here to talk about today. You can see here our 4 presenters that will each spend about 7 to 10 minutes discussing their topic areas and some research that they have conducted that can be applied to practice in best practices. So you can see here, we'll walk through each of the 4. And before we get to that, I'm just going to touch a bit more on the collaboration we have with the COPS office and how we built that collaboration together. As part of this collaboration, we are participating in forums such as this one, where we can bring some of the science of people at work, and particularly with regards to policing, forward to those actually that are in a position to implement it. In addition, as I mentioned, this will be recorded. We also provide subject matter expertise to future initiatives to include advising on things such as how to word funding opportunities or best practices in terms of implementation of efforts and programs. This allows us to also simultaneously highlight the work of these 2 groups in multiple forums, given the reach of those involved. We do have a formal MOU in place. It's the first that DOJ COPS has signed with a scientific society, so we are thrilled to be able to be the inaugural group to be working with you in this way. It's a voluntary agreement between both parties and allows us to collaborate from a knowledge-based standpoint. We are not here to advocate for specific organizations. We are simply here to provide expertise and advisement when it's helpful. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our first presenter, Anna.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anna Tornello. I am a lieutenant in the Detective Bureau of the Wilton Police Department, a medium-sized department in the Fairfield County in Connecticut. I'm here, first of all, I'm also actually, I have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, and I'm a very proud member of SIOP. And I am here to introduce this presentation with a why. So why are we here? So we know, all of us in policing, that how policing today is facing unprecedented challenges in terms of scrutiny and criticism, besides the dangers that are part of the territory and that come also with an uptick in violent crime. So we understand how, under the current circumstances, recruiting, hiring, and even retaining the proper personnel has become a challenge. And we need to have those people who support our mission of having a positive presence within our communities, right? However, some departments, unfortunately, not knowing any better, have resorted to lowering their standards in order to convince more people to become police officers. However, I strongly feel that that is not the answer, and actually is a disservice to our community, because policing requires also quality people. And first of all, I wanted to thank you all for being here today, because the fact that you're here to listen to how science can support the process is a great step forward towards changing our culture. And in fact, culture change is something that we need to talk about today. We all know how people in the past who wanted to become police officers thought that they had to show how tough they were. And by all means, this is a job that requires certain personality attributes, but we have to also distinguish between what is that you need as a police officer and what can be learned on the job or through proper training. And let's talk about that. What is that makes a good police officer? This is what science can help us do. Identify the attributes of what makes a good police officer. They teach us how to find those attributes in the right place, how to measure them, and mostly how to connect those attributes to future performance. What do we want our police officers to do? It's not about being tough anymore, only being tough, but it's about building relationships, understanding who we are talking to, how to be present, how to understand the values of the people we speak with, how to build relationships with the community members. And what is that we do? Are we consciously make an effort to hire more women, to appreciate the talent that can be brought to the table by diverse workforce, like people that have a diverse background, a diverse upbringing? And most also, what we need to talk about is, after we choose the people who seem to be the right fit for us, are we transparent enough to let them choose whether we are the right agency for them? Are we matching our values? Because that's what's also important and we need to work on. It's about policing today is about very much communication. And our recruiting efforts have to be transparent enough also to make clear what makes our profession extremely rewarding in spite of all the challenges that we are facing today. And the rewards that comes from our profession is in the ability to build long-lasting and sincere relationships with the communities. And in turn, that's how we get the support that we need from the communities that we serve. And that's why we need individuals that will help us transform every single police interaction into a positive experience for all those people that call the police when they mostly need us. So I don't want to delay this any further. So I encourage you to pay attention to this. I think too brief, but very enlightening presentation. So for the next slide, I'm going to introduce you to Jen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you setting the stage, and we're so lucky to have Anna involved in this work, and she's our constant reminder of kind of the practical perspective and how this looks on the ground, and really, really happy to have her involved in this initiative. So my name is Jen Rainier. I'm the director of the Workforce Wellbeing and Effectiveness Program in RTI International's Justice Practice area. And I'm really glad to be here today to talk to you about some of our research. So today I'm going to largely focus on a project that I'm conducting at RTI called From Research to Reality, Recruiting More Women into the Policing Profession. We're now in the last 6 months of this multiple year project, which is funded by NIJ, and we have a lot of insights to share that I'm really excited about. We do have a project website where we announce upcoming events, presentations, and upload new findings and reports and tools as we have them. And that website is going to be made available through a link in the chat. I have a few different things I'm going to reference as I talk, and we'll put those links in the chat to make sure that you can access all of the resources that correspond. Thank you so much for adding that there. One other quick thing I wanted to mention before I talk about the specifics of that project is that this project is situated in a larger body of research that I and the others on this call and other IO psychologists are doing in this space. We have another new project that's just kicking off called the Aspire project that's funded through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And I'm really excited about that work because the purpose of that project is to kind of overcome the negative perceptions of policing as a career and to help build stronger pathways into the profession, particularly for diverse individuals. And we have a lot of great partnerships on that work, including with NALI and Noble and some of the professional organizations that advance the interests of diverse staff in law enforcement. And we're working with students and HBCUs and lots of exciting things. So we have a newsletter that you can sign up for to stay involved in that project because we really want to hear the voices of law enforcement and community members and aspiring professionals nationally. So that link will be in the chat as well. Great. So again, focusing on this particular project on recruiting women in the policing profession, I think that this is really a great example of how IO psychologists can work in partnership with police organizations to use our scientific expertise to help address policing workforce challenges. There have been at this point, as many of you know, countless reports and presentations and convenings and workshops and meetings talking about the staffing crisis in policing. And sometimes people have discussed some of the innovative practices or promising practices that can address some of these issues. But without the research perspective and without evaluation, it's hard to know which components are actually most effective. So it's hard for other agencies to replicate some of these innovations or for agencies to know how to get the best return on their investment. And that's where we come in. So again, I think that this particular project is a good example of how this can be done. And I'm going to briefly describe the different phases of this research. So in phase 1, we conducted focus groups with about 75 women in law enforcement to get their perspectives, not only on the issue, but on potential promising solutions. We also did a comprehensive assessment of agencies' online recruiting materials. We know that the materials and the interactions that happen online are just one component of how agencies, interact with folks, but it is very important, especially because so many people now who seek jobs seek them online. So that was the focus of this particular work. So we looked at agencies' websites, we looked at their social media pages, we looked at all of their online presence and did a really comprehensive coding exercise where we looked at pictures and text and videos and looked at who was portrayed and how, and analyzed kind of the patterns that we were seeing there. And in particular, we looked at patterns and in where agencies differed in terms of agencies that have relatively more or less women and more and less diverse staff to see if they were doing things differently. And our findings from that phase are in an open access journal article, which we'll share in the chat as well. So we took all of our findings from that first phase and we did a pretty comprehensive online experiment where we actually tested with students and with the general population sample these ads that we created where we were advertising different aspects of policing jobs. And like you'll see in real life, right? Certain job ads for policing highlight sort of the more action-oriented and physical challenge of the job. Some highlight, the community service aspects. Others highlight, the importance of diversity in policing. So we actually tested different online ads and looked at how those resonated with students and with the general population sample. Were they motivated by the ads? Did it make them want to apply to the different agencies that we were advertising? What were their perceptions of the agency that was being advertised? So we put the findings of that experiment. Unfortunately, I can't go into all the details right now, but we created another open access journal article. So all of those findings are available there, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. To me, the most exciting part of this work is the third phase, where we're actually putting these most promising practices from the earlier phases into implementation studies in 2 agencies. So we're working with Greensboro, North Carolina, and Dallas, Texas police departments to actually implement and evaluate these practices and look at their impact. So we help them make modifications to their website. We actually launched online ads with them on Google and Facebook and tracked engagement with the different ads and how those engagements drove traffic to their application websites. And now we're interviewing recent hires in both agencies to understand their experiences with the application process, how they were drawn to policing in that particular agency, their experiences with the academy, and then their experiences in their early years working for the police department. So those findings will be available in the coming months, and we're excited to share those with you as well. So this study, as I mentioned, was multifaceted, and we've learned a lot of things. So at a very high level, we developed a few takeaways in kind of the key steps to improve recruitment in your agency. So if you are situated within a police department or if you work with police departments, these are some high-level takeaways that we think will be particularly effective based on the empirical research that we've conducted. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of these now and point you to where you can get more information on the rest of them. So the first is to create and advertise supportive policies and practices, particularly ones that promote work-life balance. We know that perceived and real, right? Work-life conflict is one of the biggest challenges of police work, particularly for women, but not just for women. We're hearing for men today as well. It's a big challenge, right? Trying to work, in a police agency and raise kids, care for aging parents, all these different demands that people have. And what we're finding through our research is that a lot of agencies are doing their best to implement supportive policies and practices that do enhance work-life balance, but often these policies and practices, they may be on an internal website somewhere, or obviously they're documented in internal, documentation for employees, but pretty rarely are those actually communicated out through agencies' recruitment websites and materials. And so one of the things that we've helped agencies to do is, take stock of the resources that you do have to promote well-being and work-life balance, and make sure that those are prominently displayed on your recruiting website. Make sure that people know about these resources that you have, because it might be the thing that gets somebody to actually apply. Another one I'll highlight is number 5 on this list, highlight the unique skills that diverse individuals bring to policing. Some agencies explicitly highlight, that they're looking for officers with different language skills or that can relate to certain, community groups and members. So highlight, the whole scope of the skills that are needed for policing, not just sort of the stereotypical or traditional ones. So here, the one that I'll highlight in this discussion is number 7, provide resources and strategies for addressing physical fitness requirements. This is, again, a prominent barrier for women, but also across candidates. People find this process very intimidating in terms of understanding the physical fitness requirements, and we're encouraging agencies to very explicitly lay out every step of the physical testing process, and if possible, to promote resources for actually mentoring and training potential candidates to help get them through that process. Our research has showed that that's one of the most important things that can be done to get more women in the field and just more people applying in general. Okay, so unfortunately, I didn't have time to go through all of those, but thankfully, we have more information available about all of those 10 kind of key takeaways in a Police Chief Magazine article that we published last year, and that link will go in the chat as well. And one of the things that I really appreciated about this article is that the research team published this in collaboration with our partners at NALI, the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives. And we took care to include concrete examples of how agencies are actually implementing these steps in practice, because we know it's one thing to read about them, but it's another to actually get concrete examples and understand how you can make this work, right, within the practical constraints that you have around budget and understaffing and, all these very real challenges. So please check out the article for more information on these 10 steps and how they can be implemented. So another thing that I wanted to point out is that one of the components of the online experiment that I mentioned earlier that we conducted with students in the general population is that we tested the impact of varying the language in the actual job descriptions that agencies used when people apply for police jobs. So IO psychology research has found in other fields that even relatively small or minor wording changes to a job description can have a really big impact on who can see themselves in the job and the extent to which people are motivated to apply because they think that it would be a good fit for them in terms of their skills and interests, but also, they pick up cues about what the agency is like from the language of the job description. So we have a couple of highlights on the slide here, but we also created a practitioner-oriented best practices document where we kind of walk through the different sections of a job description and provide suggested language that you can adapt for your own agency or in your work with agencies. And that will be linked in the chat as well. Our goal in this research, I know that Kristen mentioned it in the beginning, that our work is very applied. We don't want to do research for the sake of doing research. That's not meaningful to us or anyone. So our goal in all of this work is to conduct the rigorous research and run the statistics and analyze all of the data in order to produce hopefully really user-friendly and practical tools that'll make a difference in some of the challenges that police agencies face. Okay, so some of these resources I think I've mentioned already, but some of them I have not. And so a couple of things I wanted to point out. There are a couple of podcast episodes on this subject, one of which Rick, who's also one of the presenters today, and I recorded for The Beat. Sometimes it's interesting to kind of hear the stories and just get a little bit more nuanced information about the challenges and solutions that we can provide to these issues. We also created an infographic resulting from the information from women officers in the focus group. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, obviously, recruitment is the very first stage, in somebody's career life cycle with an agency or any organization. But obviously, it's important, as you all know, not just to recruit and hire, qualified and diverse individuals, but also to support them, throughout their lifespan with the organization. And I wanted to mention that one of the resources that we created actually with support from the COPS office through a health and wellness grant is a toolkit called COMPASS, which stands for Customized Offerings for Mitigating and Preventing Agency-Specific Stress. This is the result of a project we had ongoing for years. And we just created a toolkit where agencies can assess basically the top sources of stress within their own agencies and implement solutions that address those specific issues. So we're really excited about that and encourage you to take a look. And with that, I think that concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you again for being here. Please get in touch, with all of us on LinkedIn and stay connected. This research is valuable because it's informed by people like you, and you help to implement the solution. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to turn it over to Anne-Marie, who's going to talk about how you keep applicants engaged once you get them involved in the application process. Anne-Marie.
Thank you. I'm Anne-Marie Ryan. I'm a professor of organizational psychology at Michigan State University. And Jen has been talking about how to attract applicants, how to get them into your hiring pipeline. After I'm done, Rick is going to talk a bit about how you decide who gets to come out the other end of the pipeline, how to select the good officers that you need. What I'm going to focus on here are what I would call the leaks along the way. People who self-select out, people who you want, and how to keep those people in your pipeline. So it's important to say from the start that, losing people during the hiring process is fine. You don't want people to take up your time and energy when they're not going to work out, and you don't want to waste their time either. But if you're losing people who you would have made offers to, or you make offers to people and they're turning you down, or people accept the offers and then change their minds, or they start and quit in just a week's time, that's what I want to focus on here. The leaking of potentially good employees as you move through your recruitment and selection process, and how to avoid those undesirable losses. So every agency is different, obviously, and you need to do your own diagnosis of why you're losing people, because there could be factors specific to your environment, the history of your agency, what you're able to offer in a job. But I want to talk about some common reasons that come up a lot in our research regarding why people who are potentially good candidates drop out. One is that people think there's a lack of fit, and I'll talk about why that can be a misperception and how you can address it. A second one is a lack of timeliness in the process. And a third one is because of their influencers encouraging them to drop out. So let's start with dropping out because they don't see the job as a good fit. it's important that they have enough information to actually make this assessment a fit. You don't want them to drop out because they misunderstood what the job requires or how they'll spend their time or things like that. And there's research that shows that when people lack information, they're going to tend to think it's something negative. So you really do have to provide the information and not assume they know it. There's also research that shows if there's one negative piece of information, it's going to carry a lot of weight. So you really want to counter it with more than one positive piece of information about the position and the career in policing. We also know that ethnic and racial minorities, as well as women, may lack the informative sources that come from being well networked with those already in policing. So assuming that people have the information because, well, everyone knows this is probably not a great idea. Provide the information in the recruiting process. One thing that people often talk about is a realistic job preview. You may have heard that term before. Yes, you want to sell the job. You want to persuade people that this is a career they want to get into. They want to work with your agency. But you also need to be realistic about what's involved in what you do offer. And there's a lot of research that shows that when you balance the sell and the realism, the people you hire will be better performers. There'll be less turnover. They'll be more satisfied. And in particular for policing today, providing that realistic information up front helps to sort of inoculate people for the stressors they're going to face on the job. They have a better sense of what those stressors will be going in. They can better prepare themselves for how they're going to cope with those when they're on the job. Another reason why people drop out because of perceptions of a lack of fit is they perceive, and in some cases they actually do lack the skills needed to succeed, but they might perceive that they don't have what it takes. To make sure that they really are people who truly can't do the job and you don't want to select them, you really need to make sure that the requirements you're putting out there are real requirements. They're truly necessary at the start. They're not something people can get up to speed on in a short period of time. Our research, and Jen alluded to her research on this as well, about the value of prep programs, practice opportunities in recruiting. Clearly, helping people prepare for the hiring process helps them prepare for the job itself. And many of you may already have some prep programs for things like the physical assessment, but really think about all aspects of your hiring process and all the things that happen in those early days on the job in your particular location, and what could help people be better prepared and know about it before you even hire them. We have some research that shows the value of support and sharing strategies in those early days. Having somebody from the beginning that's got an individual connection that they can go to with questions is a real difference, not only in keeping people in the pipeline, but particularly in those early days on the job when they're struggling to adjust and they really start to wonder, well, maybe this isn't a good fit for me. Having those early assignments and mentors can help them feel and know that they do fit. In terms of this idea of fit, our research with women and ethnic minorities has also shown that organizations send signals that can make a workplace seem less attractive and not really even be aware of it, and people feeling like they won't fit. So 3 sets of questions that people ask themselves when they're looking for a job are, will I feel like I belong? Will I be accepted? Can I be myself here? And are the people I'm interacting with people who I can trust? And will I be treated fairly there? And for people who are outside of an organization, these are the information on these kinds of, to answer these questions are hard to come by. So it's the small things that are going to look to as cues or signals about what the answers to these questions are. So the people they encounter during recruitment, as Jen mentioned, those words and images used in recruiting. And this is particularly true for individuals who know they're going to be a minority in a workforce based on the demographics. So these questions are particularly important ones that individuals are seeking to answer before they're willing to go through the whole hiring process. So how do you get the answers to this and get people to have positive answers to these questions? Well, certainly you need to talk about the values and culture of your organization and how people are treated. Give people information that they can use to answer these questions rather than letting them try to guess at it or pick up on these subtle cues about it. You can do so by looking at who are they meeting with? What are the touch points? How often are you connecting with them during this recruitment process? If you just send one email or one text, or are you keeping in good contact during the entire time? Review how your organization looks when you Google it. How are you looking at your particular organization on social media, and get out information that showcases your values. Two particular issues I do want to point out is the issue of diversity dishonesty. So our research shows that people react very negatively if they feel there is some dishonesty about the diversity of the organization. They don't want to hear about a commitment that isn't real. They want to hear evidence of what is being done and how change is coming about, not just a very nice statement on a website. And police officers and people attracted to policing in particular are skeptical of people who just tell and don't show. So you really want to talk about what you are doing in concrete ways. That doesn't mean you can't talk about your aspirations for if you're a non-diverse organization and what you aspire to be, but being very clear and honest and concrete about what you're doing is particularly important. The second issue that has come up a lot in recent research, and it's been mentioned already by Anna and Jen, is the image of the profession has taken some hits in the eyes of the public. So being open in ways that are genuine for your organization and your recruiters to conversations about the challenges, how officers navigate them, it's much more useful in recruiting than avoiding the conversations and not talking about this issue at all. Another reason that may seem pretty obvious is that many people say the process takes too long, but you really may need a lengthy process if you're going to thoroughly vet people. So obviously streamline when you can and really look at your process and say, where are we being inefficient? But a big thing is managing people's expectations about how long it would take. Don't say we'll call you in a week when you know it's going to be at least 2 weeks. Be honest about that. The other thing is keeping in touch at multiple points during the process when people are waiting. If there's a stage in the process where it's going to be several weeks before they're going to hear from someone again about the outcome of that stage, dropping a note, letting them know you haven't forgotten about them is really important and much better than silence. So one last thing I want to bring up is the influence of family and friends in attraction to policing. And this isn't just the point that people become officers because someone in their family is an officer. That's certainly true, that there are connections there. But also thinking about how families might dissuade somebody who's interested in policing from actually going through fully with the hiring process and taking the job. And if you look at recent advertising by the military, you can see it's really aimed at this issue. It's aimed at skeptical influencers. So one way to address this is to create information and create events for those who are close to recruits. So you can host an event, you can provide information for these influencers, for family members, so that they can better understand the job, the challenges, the benefits. And our work with individuals who drop out of the job in the very early days right after being hired definitely shows that family support is a very huge factor in their ability to continue on, or their willingness to continue on when they face adversity in adjusting to the job. So this really is key. If you help the family understand how they can support their person through the hiring process and also on the job. So just to summarize, to plug those leaks in losing people during this recruitment process, do some diagnosis of what's going on for you and your organization. Try to address it through providing more information, providing preparation programs when possible, really looking at your messaging about your values and about helping people to feel that like they will belong. Work towards being as timely as you can, but being honest about when things are going to take a while, and think of ways to better communicate the positives of the job to those who are really going to influence people who are interested in pursuing the job. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rick to talk about how you might select people to be in your organization.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're with us, and I'm happy to be here as well. I'm going to build on what Anna and Jen and Anne-Marie have been saying. Specifically, what I want to talk about is the idea that you get people to apply for your job, you keep them in the pipeline, then what do you do with them? How do we make that decision of which candidates are the best fit for our job? And we've been talking about how IO psychology is a science-based practice. And this is especially true when it comes to selection. The history of IO psychology really got its boost back in World War I when we had the issue of all these people in the Army and what do we do with them? What jobs do we put them in? And assessment became a critical role in figuring out how we put people into the jobs where they can maximize performance and use their valued skills and ability. And that hasn't changed. All that's happened is we've learned a lot along the way. And what I want to talk about are some of the lessons learned. When it comes to any selection program, there are really two primary goals. How do we identify the best people? And how do we match the workforce to the people they serve? This is especially true in law enforcement because the people we serve are the general public. So that idea of matching becomes very important. The principles that we operate under when it comes to a selection program are really important to keep in mind throughout this talk. The first one is fairness. And when we talk about fairness, we talk about anything we're doing to make decisions, any selection activity are related to the job logically, intuitively, and when possible, empirically. This is where the science comes in. Can we document that people who do better on our assessment items, our assessment processes, are actually better performers on the job? So that fairness is always front and center. Second one is objectivity. We want to make sure that test scores and other information used in making the selection decisions are reliable and applied consistently across all candidates. It's basically saying what I need to do is going to be done to everyone equally. And then finally, something that Anne-Marie touched on is transparency. All the processes and procedures are clearly communicated to the candidates, so there are no surprises. So those three principles guide any selection program, and they're especially true in law enforcement. Many of you are familiar with the long tunnel of time that it takes to get somebody from the time you decide you have an opening, or that time of the year where you go through the hiring, or maybe in some departments twice a year when you go through hiring, the application, the screening, the group assessments, which is what I'm going to focus on today, the individual assessments, which might follow the group assessments, and then this go, no-go decision about the candidate pool, who's going to stay in and who's going to go out. And then the more intense, more expensive, more long-term background investigation, making an initial offer, and then going through the medical, psychological, and polygraph evaluations until you get to the selection of the final candidates who you move on to training. And when you look at that list, if you put weeks next to each of those items, you'd see that this takes a long time. I'm going to focus on group assessments, basically what we call selection tools. These are the things you're familiar with under the label of tests or surveys. And that's really what I want to focus on. It's geared toward assessing a large number of people at the same time. As an example, many years ago, I was involved in selecting police officers for a large jurisdiction in the state of New York. We had 23,000 applicants. And it turns out there were only about 200 job openings. So how do you move from 23,000 people down to a smaller, more manageable subset that you might go on to the next stage to interview and then through the other steps of the process? So the early assessment, this group assessment is usually multifaceted. And when I say that, I mean, there are several different types of tests or inventories that we can use to determine whether someone's a good fit for your particular organization. And some of the ways we assess candidates are using a cognitive ability test. That would be a test of thinking skills. Sometimes we use work styles or how they approach work, or more generically, personality-based tests. And oftentimes we go into background information, experiences, or what we in IO psychology call biodata. All three of these things, it turns out, all three of these types of approaches to assessment add to one another. The more we know about the person who's the candidate, the more likely it is we're going to make a good decision about those candidates. And as I said, these could be regularly in a department. You could regularly need to assess 100 people at a time or several thousand. So efficiency of the assessment process is very important. The scoring must be consistent. It has to be applied identically to all candidates. That's that objectivity principle. The results must be quickly available. Now, if we go back to that slide, and I don't want to do that literally, but if you go back to that slide and look at all the different steps you have to take, if this particular step takes too long, you're going to back up the whole system. So in testing, especially in modern day testing, it's possible to do it electronically and get results relatively quickly, sometimes in the same day. So this is one of those areas where Anne-Marie said, if you can streamline, make sure you do. So the idea here is get results available to feed into the process as quickly as possible. The scores need to be linked to the success on the job. That's that fairness principle that I mentioned earlier. And the whole process of assessment must be clear to candidates, that transparency principle. So you see these things are building on what we know as a science to put into practice. Let me give you an example of one of these multifaceted selection tools for law enforcement. And this is just one that I'm familiar with. There are many out there. And the important point is that if you're going to talk to a partner in the selection process, that partner can provide you with evidence, scientifically based evidence that their tools work. So many of these, this describes many different tests that use similar approaches. It's going to involve maybe a thinking test, a cognitive ability test, a work styles questionnaire, and a life experience survey, or some bio data. It can take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours of a testing session. The cognitive ability tests that I'm familiar with generally have as few as 48 questions, as many as 100 questions. We actually know a little bit scientifically about those, the length of a test and how it impacts different groups of test takers. Takes 2 to 4 hours to complete, and it measures things like written comprehension. Can you read something and understand it? Deductive reasoning. Can you make judgments about statements that are made and how they interact, how they combine? And problem sensitivity. Can you detect something is wrong? I remember the first time I ever did a ride around in law enforcement, the police officer said, I understand you're here to figure out what we do. He said, all we do is drive around and say what's wrong. That's problem sensitivity. Some people are better at it than others. If we can measure it, the people who are better at it are better fit for law enforcement jobs. On the work styles, things like achievement orientation, cultural proficiency, the ability to deal with people from different cultures, and following rules. Those are all important dimensions of personality that help us understand what tools the individual will bring to the workplace when they come to be law enforcement officers. And finally, background information, biodata, life experience, whatever you want to call it, a series of questions that focus in on how careful the person is, how dependable the person is, how their interpersonal relationships have gone in the past. So we ask these kinds of questions, the 3 different types of questions, in a series of tests, surveys, whatever you want, that cover one testing session. Here's an example of a cognitive ability item. A law enforcement officer is writing an outline for a presentation to a local citizens group on the role of law enforcement in responding to domestic conflicts. During the presentation, the officer would like to explain that law enforcement officers are often contacted because a domestic conflict is disturbing neighbors. In addition, the officer will point out that many calls occur prior to a crime being committed. This is effective because one of the objectives of law enforcement is to stop crime before it starts. The most effective way, that's the question, the most effective way for the officer to sum up the role of law enforcement in responding to domestic conflicts during the presentation is to say, and the candidate's given 4 alternatives. Alternative B, in responding to domestic conflicts, the officer's function to restore order and prevent possible crimes from occurring follows from the statement above, best compared to the other 3. So that's an example of a cognitive ability item. It's a little bit lengthy. That's why it takes long to do cognitive ability tests, but it does measure the degree to which this concept of logic or deductive reasoning actually fits and is important to the job that officers do. The above is an example of a series of work style or personality items. There are 6 of them listed, and the respondent, the candidate reads each of those statements and then either disagrees 1 or agrees 5 or somewhere in between. And they tick through anywhere from 80 to 200 of these items, and they can do them very quickly. Not all of the items are predictive of performance, but a number of them are, especially in the research tools that we have used in our practice. And then there's bio or data or background or experience questions. And they go something like this. Your previous supervisor would describe you as someone who usually does, this is a motivation-oriented item, and then it gives you 5 alternatives. In this type of survey, it could be that 1 or 2 of the items, if you checked either D or E, you might lose a point. And if you checked A or B, you might gain a point, and C might not do anything for you. I don't have the specific scoring protocol, but that's based on what we call an empirical key, or something that has shown that certain responses are endorsed by the better officers and others by those officers who aren't seen as effective. And then the second one, within the past year, how many times have you taken a day off because you didn't feel like going to work? Never. Probably not a credible response, but it's there, all the way to more than 3 times. So those are the kinds of items, the thinking skills, the approaches to work or personality, and the bio data that make up a complete assessment at that phase where we're trying to mass screen the candidates. So what I just went through was just a piece of that long tunnel that you have to go through from application to candidate selection. And it's a very important piece because it's where you're narrowing the field. It's where you might only take on half of the candidate pool that you started with. And when I look at a testing program or a selection process for any organization, especially in law enforcement, the 3 very important considerations are validity, identifying the most capable candidates and clearly linking the assessment results to job performance. Am I making the right decisions about people? Did I pick the people who would be best for the job? And did I eliminate those who are unlikely to succeed? Second consideration is minimizing or eliminating subgroup differences. Many of you know this as the concept of adverse impact. Minimizing differences in the candidate pool that are tied to who they are, not what they can do. And then the last consideration is, am I being as efficient as possible to move through the candidate pool to get to the people who I want to further pursue as potential officers? And I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you to everyone for your presentations today.